Since he graduated from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in 1998, he's had visiting posts at a number of congregations, including Dor Hadash here in Pittsburgh between 2005 and 2008. And of course, deeply interacted with many of us. I see faces here among our Zoom audience who had wonderful experiences and carry deep personal memories of our interactions at that time. And for the last, I don't know, 10 years or so, perhaps, he's been the lead rabbi at Mishkan Shalom in Philadelphia. Rabbi Sean Zevit has done some marvelous things to help people through this world and discover their spirituality. He's a co-founder and director with Rabbi Marcia Prager, for example, of the Davening Leaders Training Institute, and with Rabbi Nadia Gross as the associate director for the Aleph Hashpa'ah, the spiritual direction program. There was a slide that showed him with his guitar. He is a marvelous composer, songwriter, and performing artist with a number of CDs and melodies that are familiar in congregations across this country. And he's published articles and books. He's a founder of Menschwerk and serves as co-chair of the Clergy Caucus of Power Interfaith, Pennsylvania. And in so many ways, he touches the lives of people every day. And it is such a healing message that I've always experienced with Rabbi Sean. And we appreciate you coming back and helping us, Sean, at this time with your message on repairing the soul and the world together in healing and justice. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Dean. It'll just take me a couple minutes to compose myself. It's a beautiful and loving welcome mat, and of course it opens my heart to the many profound experiences that I shared with many of you that I see tonight over those 3 years, which were formative for me and my own spiritual leadership. And those years also cross paths while we hold the memory of 11 souls who were taken from us a couple years ago. And thank goodness those like Dan who've been able to recover and are with us. Jerry Rabinowitz in particular was the president during my time there. And so it's a deeply personal impact of his being taken from this world. And at the time, how I would have wanted to have been with you. And yet I needed to serve my community in the pain that was there, including many ex-Pittsburghers who were saying, where can I go now? And in fact, some of the adult children of people in Pittsburgh showed up who I had last seen in a very small version, some of them with even children of their own, coming out of the woodwork at that time 2 years ago to find safe haven and a place to share their mourning as well. So for me, when I got an email from Doris, Rabbi Doris Dayan, and then the connection with the Federation, it was Tikkun HaNefesh Ve'olam, that the part of my soul that was empty and not being with you was suddenly cycled back for the Tikkun Olam I was doing in another city at that night to have the opportunity to be with you. So I'm deeply personally grateful for that. I never imagined that this moment would arrive like this. And so I dedicate this teaching to the 11 of our brothers and sisters, and particularly, to Jerry's memory tonight, because he embodied much of what I want to share with you as well. So I want to talk about timing. I think it's also very auspicious in this moment in time, about how are we holding this moment, and each of us figuring out our place in the world with many challenging issues. But just as my colleague and the president of our movement, Rabbi Deborah Waxman, will be teaching about Jewish resilience, very shortly. So we have a few centuries, if not some millennia, with this idea of what it means to live an integrated, balanced life that is also part of healing, repairing, and engaging with the world. So I'm going to share some words to begin with here, having been empowered to do so by the Holy Host. So I wanted to begin with a quote from Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan. And just before we do that, I'm actually going to circle back up and you can join me. I'm doing the screen share. Some of you might need magnifying glasses, but go ahead and get them now if you need a microscope to read anything here. But I wanted to start with a blessing that came based on the Talmud that has become popular in the last 20 years. I was saying a blessing for study as coming together in community. It riffs off of the classic La'asok b'divrei Torah, when we say the blessing before we study literally the Torah. But these are texts from across our tradition, and for the sake of our community and for peace and for comfort and compassion. So you can feel free to say this with me in your muted form. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'tzorchei tzibur. Blessed are you, God, creator of the universe, source of our holiness in our engaging in the needs of community. And I particularly wanted to start with that blessing because in a nutshell it encapsulates the holistic Jewish approach to the idea of tikkun. Mordecai Kaplan wrote once in his book Random Thoughts, a theology which is not a plan of social action is merely a way of preaching and praying. It is a menu without the dinner. And knowing how many people struggle to put food on the plate, being given a flyer about a meal is certainly not our idea of tikkun olam. So oftentimes this task, how do we find our own self-care, our care of others, our working to dismantle systemic oppression in anywhere, and of course these days the planet itself is begging for our attention so that we may yet be able to live and flourish, not only in the past but in the future. So this daunting task with so much suffering amidst the wonder of life itself, where is one to begin to attempt to return the balance to the world? So before Tikkun Olam became synonymous with social action in the 1960s, and I'm sure for many of you, myself included, Tikkun Olam, when we think of that, we think of, justice, taking to the streets, trying to alleviate property, making sure every vote counts, whatever it may be, on and on and on. But the idea of that, the root, the shoresh in Jewish understanding goes much deeper, right? In fact, if we were in the classroom and I said, okay, where did you first hear this phrase? Let me just see a quick show of hands. How many people first heard the words Letakein Olam b'malchut Shaddai in the Aleinu prayer before even this idea of Tikkun Olam? Can I see a show of hands? If you know that phrase in the Aleinu prayer, have you heard that before? Okay, all right. So many people know it as a liturgical phrase, but it actually, Letakein Olam, appears in the Talmud and rabbinic sources earlier as a way of correcting injustices, particularly in case of a wife not being treated properly by a husband in divorce proceedings. And so the idea of tikkun itself comes from everyday life where injustices needed to be corrected. And then it found its home in the liturgy, Letakein Olam, b'malchut Shaddai, l'malchut Shaddai, for the sake of repairing and rebalancing the world to lift up divine and godly possibilities. Right? And that begins that second paragraph of the Aleinu. So it's really only in the 1960s, as we were searching for a Hebrew corresponding and Jewish corresponding value system to social action and social justice, which was bursting forth, civil rights era and beyond in a variety of ways, that we pulled over to Tikkun Olam to be that parallel, so we could claim it and name it within a Jewish context. And yet, on top of the Talmudic and the liturgical phrase that I just shared with you, the earlier Jewish mystics developed that idea of tikkun as a way, a practice of rebalancing the divine energies in the world within one's soul, tikkun hanefesh, as well as the transpersonal, the larger world level, tikkun olam. And this imbalance was not seen as the result of an absence of loving kindness or too much strength or structure or any of the other 10 sfirot in the tree of life that is in Kabbalah, but rather the missing interdependent relationships between all those energies that make up the fabric of the world. So let me stop right there. If it's not obvious at this point, I love to riff off of different teachings within the teaching. So hopefully I won't lose anybody here. But I just wanted to lay you the foundation so that you can think for yourselves, what's the balance in your life that you want to seek and how we move on a continuum. So if you can picture, and a number of you may already have a visual when I say the tree of life, Kabbalah has been very popularized in the last couple of generations. So you might imagine a 10 circles, almost as spread out on a tree in 2 dimensions, which of course it's not. If I show a photograph of Dean, I'm not going to say, well, that's Dean. Yeah, that's a little bit too two-dimensional for the amazing man that I know. So, we don't want the pop-up version, not the flat version. But what's key in any of those diagrams is the intersecting lines between. And in fact, the Kabbalists offered that there was a first creation. They say the reason that the Torah starts Bereshit, which is the indefinite article, must mean that there was a Reshit, there was a creation before. So since we're creating yet again, what happened with the first one? If the whole chemical chart was there, if H was there and O, how come no H2O? And we know from the physics of the universe that it's the bonding agent, it's the relationship, the glue that sticks those 2 H's with that O that produces water. That if we didn't have that relational dimension, that bond, you could have all the atoms in the universe and us, ourselves included, would just be floating in space and not able to create complexity and relationship and build from there. And so the Kabbalists said the reason the first creation collapsed was because all the raw material was there, but the relational field was absent. And so it just collapsed on itself, the way a building would if you didn't have any floors or intersecting beams and just put a floor on a floor on a floor. Right? So that part of that, their understanding of tikkun is not that we're inherently broken and need repair. Sometimes when people hear that, oh, tikkun olam, repair, must mean we're already broke or the world is broken and we need to fix that. That's not the deep understanding. It's more that the relational field is weak. Right? The perspective or the system may be broken, but not our essential selves. And that their repair happens when we reaffirm our covenant with life and take our values and beliefs from the prayer book or the study hall or just thought into every aspect of our life. So by reclaiming this holistic approach, we can make a great contribution to the planet now. Tikkun means I look inside myself, at myself, to become the most I can, to understand my wholeness in the world, to deal with my blind spots and shadows. And I think that type of tikkun is balanced, where we don't split off physical, emotional, spiritual, and intellectual aspects of ourselves. We look at the inner, the intra, the interpersonal, as well as the systems we are part of in the whole wide world web. So I wanted to lay the groundwork for that idea so we don't always only think of tikkun or tikkun olam as activism and repair of the world, but we also think of it within ourselves as well, within the relationships, in family, amongst friends, as so many issues have been highlighted in our day, the systems in which we function that way. So on top of that, opening volley just to set the groundwork for us. And rather, when I say that, it's a matter of a balance and a practice. So there are times in our lives where we are more externally focused, and we may be doing organizing or marching or signing the petitions or alleviating hunger, making sure that the poor are not left out in the cold. And there are other times when one has a child or an aging parent and the energies shift. I was just talking to somebody the other night who felt badly that they couldn't go on the march because if they didn't get to their parent with Alzheimer's in the care facility, they might not eat properly because there were not enough attendants for each person in the dining hall. And I said, "L'taken olam b'malchut Shaddai," to rebalance the world for the sake of heaven. You go there. That's where you need to be. Someone else will march tonight. But if a life is sacrificed or mistreated for the sake of that ideal, then in the Jewish concept, the world is now out of balance. I would often, when I'm teaching with kids, I say, if you're ever on the way to the Save the Whale action and you run over accidentally a squirrel on the highway, you pull over, you bury the squirrel, you say Kaddish, beg its forgiveness, and maybe you miss the rally, but you don't keep on going because you ran over one animal in order to save the whales. No, there's an imbalance there. There's a shattering that takes place when we replace one attempt at healing with harm done in another area. So there are any number of texts that pop up over time that give us some rooting in what it is to do the work of justice. And so text number 2, and Malki, would you be willing to unmute yourself and do your best Deuteronomy 16:20 impersonation? I know you're really good at Devarim.
I'm unmuted?
Yes, you are, yes.
Okay. What would you like me to do?
Number 2.
That little box on the upper right-hand side?
Justice shall you pursue.
Sean, I'm really sorry, I can't see it. Oh, okay. Justice shall you pursue, that you may live. Oh. Can't see the rest of the word, Sean, I'm sorry.
Melky, if you tap it, it will take up the whole screen and you can see it.
If I tap it?
Yeah, tap it once.
I did.
The little box, you tap the little box.
Oh, okay, thank you. Learned something else about computers. All right. Justice shall you pursue, that you may live and inherit the land that the Lord your God is giving you.
Thank you, Malki. It was worth the wait. That was the best rendition I've ever heard of that phrase. So here's a phrase from the Torah, right? And much is often made of this phrase, but it's often interpreted, tied into the way I was saying about how I might work with some younger people in getting the concept across. Because the sages, who are always paying attention to close reading of the text, go, this can't just be a typo. It couldn't be that the scribe wrote tzedek and then didn't realize it and did tzedek again. So, why is this doubled up? And of course, we know in Jewish life that the doubling is often a emphasis on the last syllable, right? It's like an underline that way. There's El, which means a God, but Elohim is the God of all the gods, like really plural and punching it up. But they also interpret that the reason tzedek tirdof is in the Torah is because it challenges us to do justice justly. So that if my attempt to do justice in the world, to do good for the greater of all, has consequences that harm, then I have not pursued justice justly. Right? I love the Star Trek, a very Jewish series with Gene Roddenberry being Jewish himself, and often that theme of should the one sacrifice for the sake of the all, or is the one, ultimately as important as the whole, and how do you live with that tension? So again, our tradition understands that tikkun has many variations and that it invites us to take a look at not just what we are doing, but how we are doing what we're doing. And then we've got some of the prophets there. And then text number 4, which was actually the basis of the bracha that we did in the beginning from the Palestinian Talmud. I can't see everybody here, but Doris, would you be able to read number 4 there?
Sure. Any person who works for needs of community, it is as if that person is studying Torah.
And so that's why we started off with the bracha for the sake of community, in the same formula as the one with the Torah. So an anecdote of my own experience of doing this work. Now, the tradition is not saying, oh, forget about studying Torah, just take out the trash. It's not that, by any means. The combination of study and action is always a living dynamic, a creative dynamic in our tradition. One year I was invited to a local, very large synagogue, one of those 2,000 household operations. And the theme was prayer and social justice, the internal and the external. And so I started with everyone in the circle. We did an evening service, and I said, let's just go around, share your name, and what's one way you feel you do good in the world? And people started to say, this is my name, et cetera, et cetera. Got to one particular woman, and she broke out weeping uncontrollably. Literally everything stopped for 5 minutes till she could gain composure. And I said, I don't want you to feel any pressure. If it would be helpful to say what happened for you in that moment. And she said, I was the co-chair of Tikkun Olam for this synagogue and felt I was having such impact in the world with my organizing and how we were taking on justice. And my husband wanted to start a business, and I made the decision, we had 3 kids, that for us to get to that place, that I was going to pull back from some of my volunteer offerings in order to make sure that we could succeed as a family. And since that day, I feel I haven't been doing good in the world, and I've withdrawn from community. And there was this deep silence, and people kind of looked at each other because they knew her. I wasn't exactly sure what to do in that moment. And one by one, people started testifying. Are you out of your mind? What I would give to have a family like yours, the mensches that you have raised, the loving relationship you have. Mine fell apart last year. My child won't speak to me anymore. And on came the list and list of people suffering, that the shattering in their families and friendships at the cost of doing good in the world was what they lived with, while she was living with the pain of having focused on raising a family and not being so out there the way that she had been before. So for me, it was a night in which our idea of tikkun offered that one need not make those decisions in that way, that we don't hold it as a dialectic or as a polarity. We hold this as a continuum. So those years you got to do this, we'll pick it up over here, and vice versa. As long as we keep asking ourselves these questions, as opposed to retreating, we don't want to hide at home or just go, to the top of the mountain and wait out climate change, like let somebody else handle it, and at the same time, we want to always make space for the heart and soul and the well-being so that we're in this for a long run. If we really believe B'Tselem Elohim is the divine imperative, that we are all reflections of that divinity, then why would I let my body go to waste? Why would I not tend to my heart? Once at Mishkan Shalom for Sukkot, we had someone coming to, there was a climate change conference, and we had someone who was a guest presenter. The person didn't happen to be Jewish, but we invited her to come to be part of our Sukkot service and talk about, water preservation. And we took out the Torah, we read it a little bit, and then we invited her to speak. And I said, just before we speak, could you just give us a few words about yourself so we know you a little better? I don't know what it is. I'm starting to feel like I'm like the Barbara Walters of rabbis here. She started to cry too. And, and she said, no one's ever asked me about that. And my dad is dealing with cancer, and she started to pour her heart out. And we said, your tears are the message of the water of this planet right now. And yes, please add the other information, but we all want to come to the conference now and hear you talk. You actually don't have to say anything more if you don't want to. And she said that's the first time that she had been doing her talks on environmental preservation that anyone had asked her to say anything about herself and where she felt challenged or could use support in the world. So my point is, neither of these situations cost anybody. We didn't neglect the planet for the sake of those 2 extra minutes there, but we did allow somebody who's on the front lines to feel more into their humanity, into their B'Tselem Elohim, and be strengthened to do even more and to be renewed in that way. And so as Rabbi Hannah said, what does it mean when we say you shall walk in God's paths? Surely it doesn't imply that a person may actually walk behind the divine presence. Rather, the meaning is to walk after the attributes of the Holy One. If you remember your Torah text, when Moshe's like, okay, listen, I've been leading, I talk about Tikkun Olam, I'm schlepping this entire murmuring people through the desert here, like give me a little bit of something, that I can rely on in the dark, lonely moments of night. And God says, listen, seeing my face that's not what the game is anymore. That's idolatry. And so you see my face, so, where does that get you? Rather, let me pass my essence over you. Let the values and the attributes, the midot that impact the world, get that, and then you'll know what to do. And so Rabbi Hannah is basically riffing off of that. So as God clothes the naked in the Torah, you do it. Visiting the sick, so you visit the sick. Dan, Rabbi Doris, others of you who do this healing work on a regular basis, right? Comfort the mourners, so you comfort the mourners. Notice it doesn't say, if anyone ever says to you, well, I didn't know the person, so I don't think I should go to the Shiva. Nowhere does it say only visit the people that you know, right? No, comfort the mourner. You count. You're showing up, whether you know the person or not, means, and right on to the end of days. So there's this last text here, just to bring us up to date. Hopefully you haven't gotten whiplash. We've just gone through 3,000 years of Jewish texts in the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people. But I wonder if, Dan, would you be able, do you know how to do the magic to actually read this so it's not in microfiche? I'm dating myself by even saying that. If you can read this one by Ira Eisenstein, Rabbi Ira.
Belief in God has to do with human nature, with the way individual men and women act, with their attitudes, their ideas of what is good and what is bad, with their ideals. If we believe that life is worthwhile, that it is good, that in spite of sickness and accidents, in spite of poverty and war, in spite of all the sad and difficult conditions in the world, that the world can still be made a better place, then we believe in God. When we believe in God, we cannot be discouraged because we believe that all the misery in the world is due not to the fact that misery must be there, that it is a necessary part of life, but to the fact that we have not yet discovered how to do away with that misery.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you. I'm just going to pull this off for a moment. So speaking of partsufim of connection, so we can reclaim that and see each other in these beautiful sfirot. They're a little squarer on Zoom, but nonetheless. Right? So that piece that, Dan, you read, I've always wanted Dan's book on tapes, just to kind of have him read something, because I feel that you lift the words off the page. Rabbi Eisenstein was basically saying that we can look at our work of tikkun in the world as, what do I need to fix or repair that's broken? Or we can look at where is the block in the system that I can alleviate so that the natural flow of things reoccurs. And think of that even physiologically, right? If a doctor will often look to see where is the block that's preventing the natural flow. Not, I need to create more blood and put it in the person and then everything will be okay. No, there's a blockage somewhere, or there's something that needs to be repaired so that the natural flow of energy can happen that way. And so that idea, again, of our understanding of God's presence in this world, right, is not so much that the why do bad things happen to good people aspect of it, but for me, the question is, how amazing is it that people at their own peril will rush to help somebody or do the best or share a morsel of bread when all they have it? What compels us towards kindness and generosity? For me, those are more massive questions than why did somebody do, something nasty? Oh, if they did it, like, what's the point of helping and healing? And so I hope as you sit with these pieces yourself, that you think of your own life and what the balance is needed. It's never perfect, right? So some days you need to focus more. You've just had a baby. The diapers need to be changed, right? No use pondering about, well, some people take their infants to the marches or whatever, but, in a little papoose, there are probably ways of always figuring out some balance. But the world doesn't benefit by us being more physically ill for the sake of putting a few more hours into something. We actually then require more resource to tend to the imbalance. Same thing emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. Right? And so as the years go by for myself, I find sometimes the practice is saying no. Could you please come and say this or be at this place? And I look at the balance of my life, l'taken olam, and I go, I would so love to be there, but, not going to make it, right? That would be just one too many things. Or to say, for the sake of tikkun, is it up to me, right? And many of you will remember the Rabbi Hillel piece, right? That it's not upon me to complete the task, nor am I free to desist from it. And if not now, when? And if not, who? Well, me, I better step up. But stepping up for each of us doesn't mean we are the ones that need to do it all. That's what I'm asking myself as I get older. When I get a request, or Rabbi, will you speak at, or, what 2 or 3 people can I take with me in that? I'm feeling the need that I need to step in here. Just like this week, we have at my home synagogue, Rabbi Yael and our president are handling our communal circle tonight because I have the blessing with you. And I brought them, I said, I'm feeling a bit torn. I know it's going to be an auspicious night and heaven knows what's needed. And they said, you be there because that's where you need to be. We got this one here. I'll take Thursday, you take this day, as opposed to thinking that the tikkun is all about us. And so we give other people honor. We bring other people in and we mentor them. We empower other people. Or as I like to say, for me, the definition of leader is not how many followers someone creates, but how many leaders they lift up. So I want to look around, and if I see, wow, there's 20 awesome leaders that came out of that person in their leadership role, I'm much more interested than the 300 followers that they have bowing down or buying every CD or book that the person has and feeling more dependent on that person. That's another way of applying the principles of tikkun to leadership. So I know I've thrown a lot at you here, but my hope was to give you a whiplash PowerPoint and some of the history and evolution of the idea of tikkun in our own tradition, and then lezecher all of the 11 souls whom we are honoring tonight, for you to think of, well, where do you fit on this continuum? What's the question I need to ask myself? Is the balance tipped too far in one direction or the other? And again, don't treat this as false choices or a dualism. It's not an either or, right? If I ask myself the question today, and honestly, I was literally on a call with a group of people and there was a rally downtown Philadelphia, as you can imagine, not too many people sleeping around here right now. And my president and I were on this call. There was 10 other people. 3 people said they could go down, and we said, good, because we're not going to cancel the synagogue meetings. They need us back on the home turf today. We'll be there at the next one. Right? So as a group, we could work out representation and discern, where am I most needed, right? Or like Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, of blessed memory, who taught he would get up every morning and go, okay, God, how do you want me to Zalman today? Where am I best deployed in this moment in time? Is another great question, Because one of the challenges of tikkun is we want to ask, for whom is it, right? Are we listening to the people, the place, the land, whatever it may be that we feel we want to do some good to? Or are we doing the good because we will alone feel better? Right? It's a very tricky piece. Right? We feel the pain here in Philadelphia and Walter Wallace and his family. And many of us have been out on the streets and at rallies. And others of us have been rerouting people to go, you know, the family is grieving right now. I know you want to set up something next to the house in that honor, but that actually will really hurt them. So you need to back down now. That is the tikkun you need to do to allow another process to happen and move that 12 blocks to the west, whatever it may be. So these principles are really active right now. And if we don't ask the questions, we may actually hurt somebody else because they don't know what they need, or we know better than that they do. You know, me as a white Jewish person, I'm going to come in and I know exactly what the Black community needs right now. Not so helpful, right? Because I'm going to come in with my own help and my own prejudices. But if I do it relationally, back to the whole mystical idea of tikkun, then I can interlock, right? And I can find a way of, with strength and relationships, rebalance and repair the world that way. So I want to keep an eye on the time here, and I know we're coming in for a landing soon. So I actually want to invite not so much questions as for invite you for a moment in time to sit with this and to think for yourself, what has landed for me tonight? Here we are on this very auspicious and poignant evening, gathered in memory of our beloveds. And you've heard these perspectives of tikkun and Jewish life. So right now, Shema Yisrael, we're invited to listen deeply. What is your own neshama, your own soul, saying back to you to say, this resonates for me. This is a takeaway. So if you had maybe just a sentence or two and you wanted to unmute yourself and say, you know, very succinctly, here's what I'm taking away from tonight.
I'm taking away, I've been sad, of course. I knew all these people and just involved in my own sadness. But now when I listen to you, I could maybe look outside of myself and overcome that sadness by doing something else. So I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And if I could just add, so you don't have to work so hard, you don't have to overcome the sadness. Just say, sadness, come along. I'm going to do this other thing for somebody else. So that's the balance. You don't negate your own need that way. You take the sadness and still then pick up the dry cleaning for the other person. Sadly, who knows, maybe the dry cleaner will say, hey, you look sad today, what's happening? And the next moment you get to have a lovely conversation about what you're carrying, and then you deliver the dry cleaning. So thank you, Marlene. Anybody else? What's your takeaway for tonight?
One takeaway for me is that I've been feeling call it sadness or depression or call it what you will, as sort of one directional. That is to say, it is, what the takeaway for me is that everything is in a bond and that it's multi-directional, that it's going in multi directions at the same time. And so much like Marlene, I can take that with me, but still be in a more positive relationship, even with that sadness still being carried. And it just has felt very deep because of all of the activities and all of the memories, especially surrounded by by this in this year of the second commemoration. And you give me the idea that I can be much more multi-directional in dealing with that. I'm not expressing myself clearly, but it's a much more positive outlook than what I've had, I will say, for the last several weeks.
Shamati, thank you, Dean. And you, who I know is such a wonderful musician in your own right. See, if we take, sometimes we're like, oh, I don't quite have the words, to almost treat that as guidance as opposed to an absence. Oh, because maybe I don't have the words right now because I need to play a little bit, or pick up the violin and have that speak for me, you know. So just, you know, can again even treat your own soul calling to you in that way, to say, express it a little different here. Though I definitely took something away from what you said, so. I always know, Dean, when you say, I'm not so sure if I'm expressing this right, we're about to get a real profound statement, so I was ready for you. How about one more? We like threes in Jewish life. We get one more takeaway share that somebody wants to add.
I'll say something. And sorry, my name won't show up, but thank you so much, Rabbi Zevit, for your teaching tonight. I really appreciate it. My name's Maggie. And I'm really sitting on your story, and maybe it's because my brain works the same as when you're teaching children, but the concept of stopping to bury the squirrel, and it's what sort of can start to feel more important and prioritize, and how do you prioritize? And so a lot of what you were just, discussing about the balance of being so in the moment that sometimes that also means not continuing on the intended path, and instead accepting the path that you might be on, which may have involved inadvertently interacting with that squirrel. But that the idea that you thought you were going out to a march, you thought you were going to maybe, door knock or do something for something that you saw as a higher calling. But the idea of stopping and then being in the moment with the smaller calling, when you find yourself there, that's really sitting with me tonight. And so thank you for sharing that.
Maggie, was it? Thank you, Maggie. Thank you. I got chills when you mentioned that, because just the other day when my wife and I were doing electoral encouragement, going from door to door, there was a person struggling to lift an entire fridge and bring it down the stairs. And there was that moment of like, are we going to go to the next door because we've got a mission? And we just said, well, why don't you keep going? I just felt like, how could I just keep going and watch this person get a hernia with the, all it took was just 2 minutes to get it, help it down the stairs, and then he was off, And in that moment in time, who knows what he took away? Or with my kippah on in a not a Jewish area of town, let's just put it that way, what the understanding of Judaism that person took away, much more than any other pamphlet or teaching I could ever give, I'm sure. So I know our gracious captain has given me the alert, and I know that we're about to end here, and so I want to before we do, we're going to do the Kaddish at the end. Is that correct? Great. And Miri, are you doing that? Okay. All right. Yes. So good to see you. So I just want to finish that last piece of the Nigun, the Aleinu, which then leads naturally into Kaddish, but this interpretive version by Reb Shendel Khan. May we feel your holy power. May we feel your holy strength. May we feel your holy presence surround us in this holy place. Litaken olam b'malchut Shaddai. Litaken haolam. Thank you.
Thank you to Rabbi Zevit for your teaching today. And thank you everybody for joining. And as Rabbi Zevit said, we're going to close with the Kaddish to Rabbanan, led by Miri Rabinowitz, in memory of her husband, Jerry Rabinowitz, Zichrono Levracha. Miri, I invite you to unmute yourself.
Thank you. And Rabbi Zevit, Sean, thank you for being here now and in the past for me and for Jerry. You know, for a long, long time, we have valued your mentorship and your friendship. Itgadal v'kadash shemei Rabbah ve'alma divrachu te ve'amlich malchute b'chayachon u'v'meichon u'v'chayedecho be'Yisrael v'zman kariv v'imru. Amen.
Amen.
Yeheshme Rabba Mavarach Leolam U'Omei Omaya Yitbarach V'Yishtabach V'Yitpa'ar V'Yitramam V'Yitnaseh V'Yitadar V'Yitaleh V'Yitalal Shmei Kudusha
Brichu.
Le'elamin Kol Birchata V'Shirata Trushbachata V'Nechamata Da'amiran Ba'alma V'Imru. Amen. Al Yisrael V'Al Rabbanan Va'al Talmidei Va'al Kol Talmidei Hon Va'al Kol Man Da'askin Ba'oraita Hadain V'di B'chol Atar V'Atar Hon Shlama Rabba China V'Chista V'Rachamin V'Chayin Arichim Umzonei V'Vichei U'Furkana V'Hun V'Shamaya V'Imru. Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya V'Chaim Tovim Aleinu V'Al Kol Yisrael V'Imru. Amen. Oseh Shalom B'Mromav Hu Ya'aseh B'Rachamav Shalom Aleinu V'Al Kol Yisrael V'Al Kol Yoshvei Tevel V'Imru. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, everyone. If you're staying on for the next Zoom, just stay on. Have a good evening.